Okay. Okay, let's start. Well, first of all, I would like you to talk a little bit of what is making busy you now. What projects are you working at the moment? What are you doing? What are you dealing with?
Well, we're busy with a lot of things. First of all, we have a lot of clients around the world. We are rebranding some national banks, a couple of countries, a couple of cities. We are working on pharmaceutical companies, supermarkets. So we're busy helping companies either rebrand themselves, reposition themselves, transform into the next generation, or to rebuild cultures within the organization. So that's one thing I'm doing at the moment. And then the second thing is I have a couple of shows running, one with Financial Times and the Chief Executive magazine in the US. I have another show with Newsweek in the US, and I have a third show with Brand Innovators, another top publication in the US. So we're busy doing all that stuff. And in addition to that, we do a lot of research on branding, marketing, communication, and consumer behavior. So I'm keeping myself more than busy at the moment, I have to say.
Mm-hmm. So tell us, the people who is listening to us, where are you at the moment, or where are you talking us to from?
I'm in Switzerland at the moment. So we have a base here, but also live in other countries. But because of COVID-19, we decided to be based in Switzerland for a while. So I'm in my studio just outside Zurich.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How are the countries coping with the pandemic? What's the situation concerning the disease in Switzerland?
It's fairly well. I got my vaccine, and I think that the country is getting back on track. It's not been perfect. It hasn't been Swiss perfect as one would expect, but it hasn't been bad either. I think it's a little bit like a Swiss clockwork, that the Swiss clockwork works really well until you completely change it and redesign it. And that has been somewhat required during COVID-19. So the Swiss clockwork have had its challenges rolling out the vaccine and ensuring they're adapting to things. But all restaurants and hotels has opened. So things are fairly much back to normal at this stage.
Mm-hmm. Okay, glad to hear that. That's good. Life is slowly getting back into normal here in Spain too.
Exactly. Exactly.
Let's hope things go well.
Yeah, me too.
What you were talking about the big amount of things that you're dealing with at the moment and projects you're involved in and getting on with them. Has the level of activity of the company and you as a consultant or whatever change or evolved in different ways because of the pandemic, or the level of the amount of work has been fairly constant?
Well, we've just been growing. We haven't felt the crisis at all. So we've been very blessed in that regards. But you have to remember, my philosophy has always been and continues to be that it's in a crisis situation, you actually have to dial up your efforts and not go into a shock period. So you have to remember, I published a free ebook last year called The Biology for a Coronavirus World, which were really a sort of an addition to my original biology, spelled B-O-Y. And that really was a reflection of what I felt was happening into our world right now. And I was very blessed. More than 1 million people have been downloading it, but it also has been translated already now to 20 languages and given free of charge to a lot of university schools and companies around the world. And then I published a second book called The Ministry of Common Sense earlier on this year. So from our point of view, my philosophy has always been to dial things up during a crisis and not down. And I think it really has played off. I mean, we've never been as busy as we are right now. But I also have to say at the same time that we also are spending more time in front of computers and screens, and we have, of course, adopted a lot to it. So where I in the past would spend time in consumer homes across the world and on presentation floors and in meeting rooms. We haven't been flying at all. So everything is happening from our studios, and we build up studios across the world where we run extensive 2-day workshops using all sorts of new virtual reality tools and all this stuff. So we've learned a lot. I've learned a lot. It's been absolutely amazing to see and experience this. Of course, there's been a lot of downsides with COVID-19 for a lot of people, and I so feel for that. But I think from a personal innovation point of view, it really has given me an amazing opportunity to reinvent also the way I personally see the world.
Mm-hmm. We'll talk about that later, but there's one thing that you told Reason Why a few years ago, 2 years ago, which I liked a lot, and you in a way mention it in your words now, that you see yourself as a compulsive collector of clues in the lives of people, and you collect what you call a small data as opposed to big data. Do you still look at your work in that way? Do you feel yourself that, in spite of all the difficulties and limitations that COVID has imposed on us, do you still see yourself that way? That's your work and your main labor and duty?
Absolutely. I mean, the reality is that when everyone is going in one direction, I tend to go the opposite direction. The world right now is completely obsessed with big data. But as you also know, big data can only tell you one side of the story. And quite often you need to have a hypothesis first, the reason why. And I tend to say that, if you sell a lot of umbrellas, it starts to rain more. Well, that is a conclusion from big data. Small data will tell you the opposite. And I think it's extraordinarily important for companies, governments, wherever our clients are, to understand that you cannot conclude everything from big data. I had an article in Wall Street Journal 2 days ago talking about that topic, because I think companies increasingly are coming to that realization. But here's what's so fascinating about it. Where I in the past would spend time in homes of consumers, in fact, over the last 15 years, I probably spent time in more than 3,000 consumer homes across more than 100 countries. Then today we are really doing the same work through a screen, where we have a person on site. We, for example, doing research right now in India, which of course is a very tricky market to do research in, given the situation of COVID-19. So we have family members holding cameras for us, and we basically are revisiting the entire home through the eyes of the family members while we interview them from Switzerland or from somewhere else in the world. And given the fact that we know the Indian culture so well, we know so many cultures so well, we're able to do it. I have to tell you, though, that the outcome is pretty unique. It's not as good as if you're there physically, but I have to say we really pick up small data. Here's the fact. The fact is you need to know what you're looking for. You need to be willing to listen, and it takes time. I mean, it takes a lot of time to interview a lot of people one-on-one rather than just through a survey. So yes, I believe in it. Yes, I spend a lot of time on it. And yes, it is the foundation of how I see the world.
Another funny and interesting thing that you said in your conversation with us a few years ago, not so much, but a few, is that you do not use a smartphone. Are you still on it?
I am not using a phone, and I can tell you already now, on the record, I will never get a phone again. I skipped my phone 4 years ago, and it was, I'll be frank with you, it was a bet I had with a lady called Ariana Huffington, and I'm very competitive, so I decided not to lose that fight. And after a year, when the bet was over, I said, listen, this is wonderful. I don't want to have a phone. So I skipped the phone altogether. So I do not have a phone. I don't have a smartphone. I don't have a regular phone. And it's been amazing. It's given me the time to be creative, to think, to reflect, to observe things, to pick up small data. And I will recommend anyone to do it. I mean, here's the reality. The phones are stealing our time. They're stealing creativity. They are ensuring we're not present anymore. And most importantly, they remove creativity from us because they spoon feed us with things. I mean, here's the issue. When we have a phone, we really never bored. And boredom, in my opinion, is the foundation for creativity. So the issue we have at the moment is that the phone really is not adding a lot of value, in my opinion. I think you can easily survive without it. It's easy for me to say I haven't had the phone for 4 years, but I would strongly recommend others to do the same, because here's the issue. In the future, we would be tracked to a degree which is not even funny. Everyone knows everything about you all the time. I just don't want that feeling. I want to be free. And the lacking of phone has really helped me to get to that point.
Mm-hmm. So this is an idea that you are proselytizing with. You think people should think, at least think about it, about letting down the phones and being more free and maybe more creative and...
Absolutely. I mean, the best thing I can tell you is break it down. I mean, being as crazy as I am probably may be a bit difficult, but why don't you say Sunday afternoons without a phone? And then if you succeed doing that, it's Sunday and Saturdays without it. And then it's the weekend. And then it's every evening. And then, then you sort of build up the momentum, and make sure you communicate it to the world. So the world is aware. They don't catch you. They don't say to you, listen, you're never there. I've had one client complaining to me saying, listen, you don't have a phone. And she complained once. That is one client out of a huge amount of people we're interacting with. It gives you a sense of that dependency on a phone is something we more or less not only are teaching our world and training our world to become dependent on, that you're always accessible, it also makes us become addicted. And I just don't want to be addicted, right?
Okay. Well, let's change the subject and let's talk about change, actually. You already mentioned when you talked about what you're dealing with at the moment and working on, about you're helping companies to navigate these difficult and new times and striving for change. Do you feel companies are really aware of the necessity and are dealing with it in a proper way, or what are the attitudes that you are mostly encountering in your clients or with the projects that they approach you to help them?
Everyone wants to change, at least when they say it, but they don't mean it. Very few people mean it. I mean, what's so fascinating is you can't find a single industry which have not been implemented or impacted by technology. I mean, let's just be creative for a moment and take the most obscure category like toilets. Well, guess what? In Japan, Toto is now developing toilets which are analyzing whatever we left behind us on the toilet and giving you a health report straight away and informing your doctor about it. I mean, that is how advanced technology is and how it's penetrating every corner of any industry out there. So I think this is super important for everyone to be aware of, that you cannot avoid change. The issue is that we actually deep inside resist the concept of change. I mean, one of my favorite stories comes back to an experiment done with chickens. They're stuck into a cage for half a year, and one day they're let out on the beautiful green grass. And the sun was shining, the birds were singing. And guess what? The chickens went out, and after 30 seconds, they went straight back in again. And I call that the chicken cage syndrome. And the chicken cage syndrome is really characterizing how we as people are. So a lot of my work, a lot of our work today is to understand what I define as the immune system, the defense mechanism for change within the organizations, and helping that to be broken down and rebuilt. And through that immune system, working with culture transformation, we make a company see the reality on the wall and adopt to change. And the change, of course, is so much linked with what the brand has to stand for, where the company want to go. So at the end of the day, we need to talk to customers. We need to understand the brand. We need to understand the culture. And all of that combined really leads to a transformation of an organization. And that's the reason why a lot of companies, I think, in the past has failed, because they think either it's a branding exercise or it's an innovation exercise, or let's do a customer research study, but they quite often forget about the culture to get people with them. And that's the reason why over the last, I would say 12 to 13 years, we worked a lot on understanding the psychology of organizations, of cultures, and are working today with some of the top business coaches in the world to understand how do you navigate an organization through a transformation and get people with you rather than just a department.
Mm-hmm. This could be common lines on which to work on change, and that relates in a way with my next questions, is that there is kind of a general recipe or a general attitude that you could recommend to all companies embracing change, or really every company should have one very specific way of doing it. There's a kind of a frame of mind or frame of things that could be visible for most companies embracing change.
Well, absolutely. You know, if you take a look at my screen right now, you will notice that there is a sort of an insight I've learned through many years, which is really giving you a sense of how it works. So let's say this is what we call transformation up here.
Mm-hmm.
And what is really interesting here is we have time down here.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting is when companies are doing transformations, they quite often will notice a curve looking like that.
Mm-hmm.
And up here, you have the big project kicked off. Everyone is super excited. And then the reality kicks in here. And in the reality, what happens is that the momentum is gone. There's no evidence that it really works. New people are coming on board. Everything just becomes very tight. What you see happening here is really what we call the immune system. This is here. And the immune system is really dangerous because the immune system is multiple things. It is people which want to change but don't know how to change. It's people pointing at other people saying, I want to change, but they have to change first. It's all those things. And that's what we call the frozen middle in the organizations. So one of the things I've learned you have to do is that you'll never avoid that curve, but what you can do is you can create a curve looking like that. And this is really where it starts to be very interesting, that it actually starts to go up down here. So how do you get up there? What is it which is happening? How do you avoid the free fall, and how do you start to turn that curve around? Well, what we learned through multiple years, it actually comes back to our observation with the chicken cage syndrome. And if I come back to the chicken cages, let me just give an example. Let's say we have 4 chicken cages all stuck from the top here, right?
Yeah.
So now you're seeing cages. They're surrounded around a little square. I'll be very nice to the chickens. So I'm opening the cages out to the real green world here. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Here's the issue. If I want to get the chickens out, most people, if I had a piece of corn, would place a corn in the center here. And they'll say that would be the place. But here's the issue. If let's say I'm chicken A, and I now are looking this corn, I'm saying to myself, my God, this is far away. My KPIs are not supporting that. And by the way, this is a crazy idea. What if my manager is fired? I'll stand up there and look like an idiot. So the first thing I will do as a chicken is I'll look around, and then I'll look at chicken B, right? And chicken B, guess what, will go through exactly the same consideration and look at chicken C, and chicken C will look at chicken D, and all of them will conclude, do you know what, it's not worth it. I'll go back into my cage and I'll enjoy the life I've had for many years, right? Now, here's the issue. How do you then get the chickens out of these cages? Well, one of the things I've learned is that you actually have to do another piece of psychology. Instead of placing the corn in the middle, let's just remove it from the middle and place it just in front of the cage. Now, that is what I call 90 days intervention.
Mm-hmm.
A 90 days intervention is a small bite-sized change you make in the organization, which immediately can create a change. Now, if I'm chicken A and I eat that, imagine that, it's a wonderful piece of corn. And guess what chicken B will do now? He'll look at the corn and say, well, he's eating that. That sounds delicious. I'm going to do that too. And of course, the other chickens are going to do the same. And suddenly you actually have created a little piece of transformation. And then you place another corn and another corn and another corn. And suddenly you end up with that transformation you had in mind in the first instance. This is what is going to help us to transform companies. So if I go back to that curve I showed you previously, where it just had a free fall, the only way to change a free fall in an organization is to create what I call proof points. And proof point really comes back to saying, hey, we need to have some interventions going on, but we need to show as well that they really work. This is where the 90-day interventions are kicking in here. This is where the evidence that actually the immune system is starting to break down. And a lot of companies are missing that opportunity. They say, we were successful, we failed, new management, something is wrong, and then it starts all over again. And what happens is that if you start all over again, it will be another cyclus. But every time you do the cyclus, that curve will be lower and lower because people start to have change fatigue in the organization. And therefore you end up with basically just a lot of administration and bureaucracy, which really is just not productive, right?
Okay, thank you very much. That has been really easy to see in very graphic way of explaining your ideas and the way of working. You have stressed the necessity of brands, of companies helping and supporting their brands looking towards a post-COVID era, post-COVID time. And do you think they're doing it properly? Do you feel that they're approaching this task in a proper way?
No, I don't think so. I think a lot of companies are misunderstanding that this is the biggest opportunity they have. So let me just take you back in time. In the good old days, a company like Procter & Gamble would work with a philosophy called entry points. We have in our lives 7 entry points. I expect a newborn baby. Suddenly there's baby strollers everywhere. Amazing. It really creates a change of my behavior. I suddenly buy products. I behave differently. I live differently because of an entry point. Now we have 7 of those. I would claim for the first time in living memory, we have what I call an 8th entry point. It is a global synchronized behavioral change which have happened around the world. And that global behavioral change has happened because of 3 things. The first thing is, as we've been locked inside our homes, we have changed our interaction with each other. We have suppressed one really important thing in our life, which really is touch. We haven't really touched anyone at all. And we know today there's a direct correlation between touching and life expectancy. In fact, there was an experiment done with rats, where the first group of rats was touched every second hour by the scientist over 1 month, and the second group of rats were not touched at all. Well, guess what? Within 14 days, the second pair of rats, 50% of them had died. We haven't touched people. And in fact, when we touch, we actually stimulate our ability to survive. So that means there'll be enormous amount of depression coming out now. People will be depressed. We're seeing that the biggest cause of people are announcing health issues in the US right now in companies is anxiety and depression in the US. And it's not just a little bit, it's extraordinarily high. We see sadly that suicide rates around the world has tripled more or less because of the pandemic. So the whole touch issue is important. And with that comes a lack of of purpose. What is my purpose in life, my sense of belonging, all that stuff. Now, why is this important for people and companies to be aware of? Because we will change. We will change the way we interact with products and services, and what we're looking for will be differently. And that leads me to the 8th entry point, because the 8th entry point is really going to be an experience economy, where we in the past more or less would buy stuff to accumulate wealth or accumulate a sense of superiority. We today will actually say, hey, I want to buy experiences instead. And what's really fascinating about this whole experience issue is that young people, when we're doing research with young people, let's say 18, 20, 21 years old, when we say to them, what do you want to do post-COVID-19? They say, I want to have a bucket list. These are the things that I want to do before I die. Well, I never heard about an 18-year-old person talk about death and talk about what they want to do before they're dying. And that gives you a sense of how profound that change is. That means the travel industry will change. It means the experience economy will change. It means the way we buy and acquire things will change. It means the way we decorate our homes will change. And that's the reason why the 8th entry point will have to impact companies. The other side of the story, which is equally important, is that company cultures will also have to change. The fact that you have been sitting in front of a screen for, let's say, a year or 1.5 years means that you have lost the company culture. Why should I work for you as a company? I don't have the sense of belonging. I'm really not happy. I feel like a robot. I'm working the ass out of me. And at 6:30 in the night, where I've been in back-to-back Zoom calls, I throw myself at the couch and I'm exhausted, right? And then I had to do my work. So what happens now is that companies have lost company cultures. And here's the issue. Company cultures is the asset they have, but which are not aware of. I've attended a lot of board meetings over the years, and not a single time has the key question about company culture been discussed. Well, guess what? That will be the number one point of the agenda, because companies will start to lose very valuable staff. Because there's not a big difference for me having a link to you as an employer or a link to someone else. Or in fact, why don't I have 5 links, which means I'm a freelance, means I become a personal brand suddenly. So the way we motivate people, the whole hybrid model of how we get back to work will have to fundamentally change with culture in mind. And I think a lot of companies have completely overseen it. Yes, they've been earning money on the bottom line. They don't have the rents anymore. They don't have the flights anymore. They don't have the hotels anymore, but they're putting it on the bottom line. They haven't reinvested that into create a powerful culture. And that is where the biggest opportunity is, and is where they missed the biggest opportunity at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, we've been talking about change. Let's move the subject to a little more personal field. And I would like you to talk about what change would you like to be realized? What thing would you, on a personal level, if you want, what thing would you like to happen to change really, and in your life and our whole life as a society?
Well, on a personal level, I've lived by a philosophy which I acquired many years ago, which is if I was to walk out on the street and there would be a car bumping straight into me and I would fly in the air, and supposedly you would have a couple of seconds to think about your entire life in reverse. Then I want to end my last sentence by saying I did everything I wanted to do. Well, I was so blessed that 6 years ago, I was able to say that. So everything which have happened over the last 6 years has been a bonus, which is amazing that you get a free bonus in your life. But I got that. So that's actually not a lot of stuff I want to change. No, there's the nitty-gritty small details, which really is not making a big difference. But in the end of the day, I actually have to tell you, I live by a very simple principle that I'm 51 years of age now. If I'm lucky, I probably will have 19, perhaps at best 29 years left in my brain, and then I'm dead, gone. And
I'm sure you will have a long life.
Yeah, perhaps. But what I am very aware of now, for every day I do something, I spend time on Zoom or Microsoft Teams, I travel, I interact with clients, I do transformation projects, I'm stealing a moment out of my life. I'm stealing an hour or 2 hours, and I only have one bank account with between 19 and 29 years, if I'm lucky, left. And I will never get it back. There's no interest in it. There's no nothing. I'll never get it back. So therefore, that is my fundamental philosophy, and that's what I'm making decisions based on. So in that way, I tend to say I live in a dream, and I hope I never wake up. But when it comes to the world, my view is slightly different. I do feel today that the world is derailing for multitude of reasons. I think, first of all, that people are never present anymore. I think we have become slaves of social media and of the smartphone to a degree which is not healthy. And I think that degree will become even worse in the future. The consequence of that is that we never really are proactive. We're always active. We're always following other people, always being directed by our to-do list or our calendar outlook or the next Zoom call meeting or whatever we have to do. But when do you actually stop, pause, and reflect for an hour and actually start to reconnect dots and be creative and let that define your life? I think the issue today is that we don't do that. Increasingly, people become slaves of technology and slaves of their own routine and are actually not happy about it. So I'm very concerned about the society as a whole, because we do see that means that we'll also see a higher suicide rate. The second thing I'm concerned about in our society, and which I would love to change, is really the fact that we as a society right now are being tracked to extreme degree. And what we're seeing happening right now is nothing compared to how it's going to be 10 years from now. Now, when George Orwell was writing his 1984 book, I remember we all were sitting there in the year of 1984 and saying, when is it happening? When is it happening? Well, guess what? If you go back to the street where George Orwell actually wrote the book in London, that very street has 239 cameras on that street alone. In the area of London. It gives you a sense of how that actually became real. Alexa, Amazon's very clever attempt, which by the way is a company in its own right, with 10,000 people working in Alexa alone, designing that smart speaker. Well, guess what? Alexa now has filed for 2 patents, which is for me very striking. One patent is called silent whispering, which is where it listens into every person's conversation and plan contextual commercial messages in whatever you say. So if you and I were talking about going to Spain for a moment, Alexa will immediately say, "Psst, I was hearing your conversation. Here's a really good offer to go to Spain." But the second, patent that just filed is that it's also listening to your tone of voice and to your mood. And through algorithms and AI, it now can determine if you're depressed, even if you have suicidal thoughts. And a lot of different professors now are discussing if this should be legal at all. Now, here's the issue. If I take your voice, I take the way you surf online, I take your geo patterns of where you are, I take your Facebook comments you're putting there, I take the photos you have uploading and analyzing that through whatever, then suddenly I have a very accurate picture about who you are because I'm benchmarking that with 7.5 billion people on planet Earth, and your brain can just not follow that. And that means we are suddenly being predetermined before we even know it ourselves. And things become a self-fulfilling pattern around us. We think it's happening because of coincidence. And guess what? 95% is not a coincidence anymore. And that is, for me, extraordinarily concerning. So these are the 2 things I would love to change in one way or another.
Okay. One of the subjects I would like to bring to the conversation, and it relates very much to what you were mentioning just now, is hypothetical and of cash, of hard money. You see, we're going that way, that we will, the cash will leave our will, and we will only do electronic transactions, digital transactions.
Listen, mark my words here. That's never going to happen. Of course, you will have a blockchain on one hand coming in and playing a role in one way or another because the technology makes sense. And we'll have hands-free payment going on, which we see, of course, a lot in both Taiwan, in South Korea, and in China at the moment. But the reality is that the society always will have a buffer of another format of trade. The tip you give to the waiter to motivate him or her, the way you give people compensation, which should not be on the radar. You have a huge illegal market running at the same time. You saw that when suddenly blockchain or Bitcoin was banned by Tesla, then suddenly the share price went down. I mean, in the end of the day, what we will see happening is, yes, a bigger portion of our life will be virtual currencies, but you'll hit a rock bottom, which probably will be, a certain percentages, which will always stay physical cash. Because in the end of the day, you need to give people sort of a token to say thank you. And the virtual part will be tracking you too much in certain context. So if you were to remove a tip from hospitality, you will never get good service again, I would claim, in lots of parts of the world. I mean, a lot of things will happen where what we appreciate will disappear. And we see that today when people actually can, when they're paying virtually, they can give virtual tip. Well, guess what? The tipping has gone down dramatically, and then people have to pay tax of it and all that stuff. And that's one major component to it. The other one is, of course, blockchain technologies. And you have to remember, if you go back in the history of money, there's some fundamental things we have to be aware of. If you, for example, take the good old days with money, you will see that if I had a coin like this, that particular coin would be in gold and it would be issued by the royal families. And that worked very well. But the problem was what the royal families realized, that after 10 years, that coin actually was only this big, because the farmers would have been shaving off gold from it to get some secret value to themselves. And because of that, what happened as the part of the innovation process, that ripples were put on the coin the whole way around. So you could see if this one had been sort of cut down in size or not. Very smart technique. But you know what is interesting? That ripple effect is actually what we're seeing causing the whole issue right now, because those ripples around that particular coin actually was also what we call inflation. Inflation is really the idea of that the royal family will constantly change the format of that coin from being gold to become silver, instead to look like it's gold, and suddenly it was just metal in the end of the day. And those money were cast back into the system to run a society. If you introduce blockchain, and because of that, let's say Bitcoin as one of the brands around the world, that shaving off a little bit of gold all the time, which actually makes government system works, will disappear. And that means the government systems can't take a share of it anymore. It will basically bypass the whole thing. And because of that, what probably will happen is the concept of democracy will start to be in a challenge. We'll certainly see that the system we know today and take for granted will start to disappear. So the whole blockchain idea will need to be reshaped to fit to the local country setups and to how market economics are working. It hasn't been like that today. So there's some fundamental questions which needs to be addressed, which haven't been addressed yet, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's go to another subject, and I think it's quite important at the moment for several reasons, which is fear. What role is playing, what influence is having, both on a corporate level in companies, their attitude towards society and their activity, what role is playing for us personally, how is influencing our attitudes and ways of living at the moment.
Can you rephrase the question a little bit, please?
Yes, I would like you to talk a little bit about fear, which is, I think...
about fear?
Yeah, fear in society and in the corporate world, how both sides are coping with it in the moment when the disease has perhaps having an influence on that we do not feel so secure now as maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah, well, it's a very big question. Fear is living in a part of our brain called the amygdala. And fear is sadly accumulative. So let's take a scenario, a sad scenario, but let's say someone broke into your home one day and they went into your bedroom and you're not there, thank God, but it happens. Then I bet you that the day after, you're not only going to be aware of that there's someone was in your home and be on alert. When you walk on the street, you're also going to be on alert. And fear is because of that accumulative. It actually penetrates through every aspect of our life and we can't get around it because amygdala is overriding everything in our brain in order to make us survive and thrive. And what our studies are showing today, looking into neuroscience, is that if I am bombarded with negative news from the media, which is talking about very negative aspects of life, or I'm bombarded with a self-fulfilling bubble of news coming from Facebook and other social media channels, which, as you know, if I spend more time searching for certain topics on YouTube, on Google, on Facebook, well, then it accumulates even more content down that path. What happens then is that I'm accumulating a sense of fear. And as I accumulate a sense of fear, I'm much more on alert. It means that my anxiety levels are going up. It also means my depression levels are going up. So fear has, because of COVID-19, had a dramatic impact on our brain structure. And I would claim that if you were to measure me, you and I in the world today compared to just 2 years ago, we probably are much more fearful, probably 20-25% more than we were prior to COVID-19. That means that we are much more impacted by the chicken cage syndrome because we're much more hesitant to leave our homes. And I'm sure you have tried it now. And I'm very curious to see if all the listeners and viewers here are having the same feeling. But you in the past would be pretty quick on visiting people or jumping on a plane and go to another country to have a meeting or a presentation. Now you probably got to the point where you're saying, yeah, do I really need to do that? Do I really need to jump on that plane? Why don't we just do it virtually, right? This is not just because you're a nice man and you want to support the environment. It's also because we become addicted to our chicken cage. We actually we need to pull ourselves together to go outside our frames, to go to another country or whatever. And that is fear, which is running that behavior. This means that people will be much more hesitant in the future to change their lives. But what's interesting about when you change your life, you go through transformations. And let me explain that for a second. If you, for example, go from, let's take an example. You go from destination A to B, right? You're traveling in your car, you're going from A to B. It's a wonderful trip. Now, that feels like a half a day of travel. Let's imagine now that you go back again from A to B. Then what you probably have noticed is that the trip back always feels shorter than the trip on the other way. I don't know why, it's always shorter. So why is that happening? It's happening because our brain is rendering our information. All the information we get on board goes into our brain, and it spends a lot of energy on acquiring all this information I see on that trip. But when I go back, it basically just plays a little video, and the video is already stored in our brain. So we perceive time to be different. One of the things I realized when we worked with Swiss International Airlines, a Swiss airline company, was that when I talk to people in the cloud, cabin crew, they had to perceive time differently than people on ground. They always said to us, oh, we never receive any information from ground staff. And ground staff said, we inform them every week. They never listen. Well,
No. We are missing you at the moment.
in their life, and your country, and your environment, their time actually went slower. That's how it went slower. The more transitions you have in your life, the slower time go. The fewer transitions you have in your life, the faster times go. Think about your old grandmother. If she's still around, I bet you she would say to you when you visit her, how's time going? And she would say, oh, I'm so busy. I am so busy. And you're looking at her and you're saying, she's just sitting there in the chair. How can she be busy? So what's happening is that the perception of time is changing in our world right now. And that means when we stuck in our little office at home, or we create a routine life, we actually will start to live our life faster. We will perceive time as going faster, and we get less value out of our life. This is really fascinating. So what you have to do is you have to work with a lot of transitions in your life. So whenever I go on a weekend trip, I go away for 48 hours. I go to 3 places. I stay at 2 hotels. And when I come back home, I feel like I've been away for a whole week. But actually, I've only been away for 2 days. I get more value out of life. I think this is the issue with amygdala, fear, and all this stuff. Fear will mean that we'll do less of that stuff. We'll go more into routine because it's comfortable. And because of that, we'll get less value out of our life.
Mm-hmm. And could brands and companies help us to deal with these problems? Do you think they have a role to play, or is it just a personal thing?
Absolutely, they have. I mean, smart brands will help you to transition environments. You can go into a very macro level and say, if I go into a retail store and I should transition into another universe where I feel I'm in a different world, where I feel things differently. And because of that, I have such a profound experience. I'll hang around more. My dwell time, as we call it in English, is going up. And we know that from my supermarket designs, for example, in the US for Lowe's, that when we design store the right way, the dwell time goes up. Well, the more the dwell time goes up, the bigger basket size there is and the bigger the return rate there is. And I'll give you one example from that. So Lowe's in the US, we decided we wanted to create a cafe in the middle of the supermarket. And we had all sorts of discussions about how it should look like, and we created this cafe thing. 2 years later, the president of the company came back to me and he said, Martin, that cafe really doesn't work. It was not a success. And I said to him, really? Because it went against all my philosophies of dwell time. So I said, yeah, it's not earning money. I mean, it goes at best break even. I said, let's just take a look at some of the other numbers. We looked at the other numbers and the dwell time of everything went up. Here's what's interesting. When people went into the cafe, it was almost like when you go very fast, everything goes fast, right? You go outside, you have your kids screaming at you, the husband is waiting at home, you are checking all your messages at the same time, and you have 19 minutes to do your shopping trip in the supermarket. You are on a roll, everything goes fast. You now go into a supermarket. If there's nothing transitioning you into changing the gears, you will speed through the whole store and actually not be exposed for new brands, and you probably won't do any additional buying. So you'll go out there. But if I put you into a cafe, I will change your perception of time. It's like you'll say, whew, now I can relax. And suddenly your perception of chance will change. I have all the time in the world. Let me just think about what I want to do. Oh, by the way, there's a steak over there. I can smell the smell. Oh, look at the red wine next to it. I want to have some red wine. What about the spices? Oh, I want to have a sauce to that. And suddenly what happens is what we call adjacency sales is happening. And what we realized was the dwell time of people sitting in the cafe tripled. Yes, it's true. We didn't earn money on the cafe, but it tripled with everyone else. Every other department had an increase in sales. And that's a very good evidence about how companies need to understand the concept of transformation in the consumer's life, because it changes our perception of time.
Mm-hmm. There's another topic that you've dwelt a lot from what I've read and heard to you, and it's the internal thing, the internal world of companies, and how companies should be worried about making the people happy. Because if people within the companies are not happy, customers are not going to be happy. And the bureaucracy is big in companies, the KPIs are putting an enormous pressure on people, and things are not going well in that way, and probably it will be impossible to make people a little bit happier or to allay their fears. So, do you think companies are aware of this thing, or they just don't realize it?
Well, listen, I want to start with a quote from Richard Branson, which once said, take care of your employees and they will take care of your customers. And I think that is as true as it possibly can be. If you have a company culture which really thrives, you can feel it as a customer. And I think a lot of people forget about that dimension. They think that we as employees are robots going to work and just doing our job. That's true. But amazing customer experience will make you buy more, will make you become more loyal, and will make you basically recommend that company or that brand to the outside world. And for some naive reason, people see the company culture as a very fluffy, very intangible dimension with very little link to the bottom line. Well, I can tell you, having worked with hundreds of companies around the world, that's completely and utterly wrong. Mm-hmm. I know for a fact that when we want to change cultures, the first thing we work with is to work with people. We work with people, we motivate people, and we create co-innovation projects where we remove frictions within the organization. And the way we do that is really to look at the world in a slightly different way. So if you imagine we have a graph here, we have do up here, we have don'ts here, and we have should here and shouldn't here. Mm-hmm. Then what you will see is that a lot of companies in general have a tendency to create a lot of bureaucracy, which creates a lot of frictions in my life. So it's just painful to go to work. Just to put it into perspective, some of our research studies today are showing that in some companies, they're spending more than 50% on bureaucracy, on attending meetings, which really is adding zero value to the organization. Those things are living down in this space, which is shouldn't and don't, okay? And up here, you have all the stuff you want to do, that's should and do. And the first thing I would advise companies to do right now, post COVID-19 or just on the brink of it, is to go through what I call an internal due diligence. So look at this way. Just as you are defragmenting your computer from time to time to make sure you store memories in a different way so you become more efficient, why don't you do your own defragmentation? You basically restructure your life. You map down what are you doing on a day-to-day basis and ask yourself some fundamental questions. And the question, of course, is what should I not do, right? What should I stop doing really in the end of the day? So let's just call that for fun, stop here. And then I'll ask the other question up here, which is, what should I go ahead and do? And here you will have, what should I park? And here is, what should I keep? Now, if you take a look at that, the first thing you should do for employees is to get rid of all the bureaucracy which is here. Ask them, what should we stop doing in an organization? Because here's the issue. We came from a situation where there was no virtual environment. We took all the rubbish from how we are managing companies, applied it to a virtual world, added even more rubbish to it. And now we come on the other side where we have so much rubbish, we need to clean up our day and ask ourselves if we really need to have 9 hours of consecutive Microsoft Teams calls. One of my clients have that. In fact, they go to work at 5:30 in the morning, and most people are stopping their work at 8:30 in the evening. That is in front of a screen for more than 12 hours. Think about how draining that is. I said to them, let's stop doing it. Let's make sure every morning from now on is without Microsoft Teams. We ban it. Guess what happened? They all thought it was a wonderful idea. They implemented it, and it happened for exactly 1 week. Exactly 1 week, then they went straight back again. What happened? The senior management thought they were so superior that actually they were allowed to have a couple of calls just to coordinate the troops. Well, guess what happens? Everyone else was saying, so if you are in the business, you are doing it anyway. And if you are one of our losers, you stay away from that, but you won't be promoted, right? So the whole world did it. So what you have to do is you have to go back and ask yourself, what will we stop doing? What will we start doing up here? What are the things we should keep and improve? All that stuff. So do that due diligence. And once you've done that, you actually will end up with what I call not a to-do list, but an on-to-do list, where you remove frictions within the organization. This is what people need now. People need a fuel, energy, excitement, passion, rather than saying, my God, I don't know where this is ending. It continues on and on and on. And now they have a transformation project they want to do. Okay, I can't even do my own work, and now we have to do transformation. And it's transformation project 3, because we did one in 1855, we did one 2 years ago, and it happened with nothing. Nothing came out of it. So that's the reason why culture is so extraordinarily important, right?
Okay. And what's the role of something that has been talked about maybe too much in recent times, which is purpose for companies? What role it can play in invigorating and making better the culture of companies, and of course, making better the life of employees within the company?
Well, remember that if you take a look at the chicken cage, you are sitting here, right? Remember your chicken A, and we have the purpose over there. That the purpose giving you a guiding light, and it has 2 sets of lights. It knows where I'm going, so there is a longer sense of sort of approval of that what I'm doing is the right thing, and it also typically goes wider and adds more purpose than consumption. It either helps the planet, it makes people's lives easier or better or more fulfilling, it makes us happier. It does something which is not necessarily linked with earning money, profit, or share price. If you can combine those 2 things by having a strong dot on the wall, which both combine the fact that the company has to earn money to survive and keep your salary, but also have a higher sense of purpose, then you really have something interesting. But then you have to go back to the chicken cage syndrome, because you have to remember, for me to get to that point, I need to understand what is the link between the higher purpose and what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. So what I call the 90 interventions, right? That one step at a time will not only give me a personal fulfillment feeling, wow, I achieved something today. It also will help me to achieve something grander, something where we as a company united are conquering the world and making life better for people on this planet. And that is really the issue. I think quite often purpose sometimes becomes so overshadowing, and without those dots really leading to getting to that point, that there is a disconnect between really the purpose and what the company is doing on a day-to-day basis. And that suddenly becomes this plaque hanging on the wall in the reception with everyone is looking at, right? And then you really have, a huge gap between where we are now and where I want to go in the future. So really the purpose is not just to develop a beautiful purpose. The idea is also to say we need to create a bridge, and that bridge has to be stuck down by small micro bridges in the end of the day, which can help me to get to that point. If you manage to do that fine balance here, then it works. But if it's just that plaque hanging on the wall, which is so beautiful and everyone looks at it and they think it's wonderful, but no one knows how to get to there, forget about it. It's just pure makeup and marketing play, right?
Mm-hmm. And it is convenient for any company to have one, to work in that line, to have one purpose.
I think first of all, every company should have a purpose, but I also have to tell you one thing. I've worked a lot in companies where we've done reverse engineering with purposes. We did not sit down and say, let's create the most amazing purpose and then we create a company around it. In fact, we started the reverse way. We said, where is there consumer need in the market? Where is there what we call a piece of small data proving an opportunity? Then we went back and we said, what is the best solution for it? And once we had that framework, we said, okay, we need to elevate this. And that's where we created the higher purpose. And the higher purpose further helped us to frame things. We did not start by saying, we want to make the world a better place, so let's invent a product to do that. Sometimes you can do it if you're a startup company, but if you are not a startup company, you've been around for 100 years or 150 years, you can't do it because you have a machine, you have a plant, you have factories, you have people which you have to feed. So you need to do a migration, and therefore quite often you'll have to do reverse engineering and slowly change the direction of the company rather than resetting everything in day one, because it will never happen, right?
Okay, Martin, thank you very much. We're just finishing our time, and before we put an end to the conversation, which has been fascinating, thank you very much for all your ideas and insights. Just two things. The first one little riddle, if you want, and it's if you can find a single word that can define your state of, I don't know, of mind, or your state of, how do you feel now about your life and your work? One single word. Okay, that's great. And the last thing, any good book or article or film or whatever that you have seen, read, or heard recently that you can recommend, that is worth the time of our readers and listeners?
I'm going to reveal a secret for you. I've never read a book in my life. I only write them. I know it sounds really arrogant. It's not meant to be like that, but I'm so petrified of reading a book and stealing from it. So my source of inspiration, my mentor in my life is the ordinary person. It's the consumer. I love and I thrive on spending time with people, observing people, learning from people, and I'm very hungry for knowledge doing that. But I don't read books. So I guess the only choice I have, if I had to recommend a book, is to recommend The Ministry of Common Sense, my latest book, which hopefully will give you a sense of how my thinking is. All of this, I want to stress, is not said in an arrogant way, but I really do not read books. I apologize for that. And it's really a conscious decision I made many years ago, because when you write, as I do, where you try to come up with original thinking and reflections, you're so susceptible for other people's thinking. And when you write for a global audience, you can very quickly fall into the trap of being too inspired by other people's ideas and make it become your own. And I just don't want to be seduced by that. So I stay away from it entirely.
Okay, Martin, thanks a million. It's been interesting, illuminating, and funny, and a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time. In my name, in the name of Reason Why, and of our listeners. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thanks a lot. Thanks, everyone, and good luck.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.